Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our monthly webinar, Next Generation Employee Retention. My name is Meg Giroux, and I am the Director of Marketing and Communications here at NYSFDA. I'm filling in for Kelly, who is on vacation. So before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items. First of all, you will only receive credit for this webinar if you are pre-registered through your member portal or over the phone with Kelly or Michelle. Pre-registration is extremely important and absolutely required moving forward. Please allow 7 to 10 business days to receive your credit. And then as we go through the webinar today, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box and we will have time at the end to go through the questions. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Gabrielle Boucher. Gabrielle is frequently called upon to speak and consult on employee motivation and multi-generational engagements for Fortune 500 companies, presidential campaigns, and government agencies. Gabrielle emerged on the scene as the leading millennial voice after her breakthrough TEDx talk challenged the notion that millennials are the next greatest generation. She started the Millennial Solution at the age of 25 after attending one too many workshops on millennials led by someone who wasn't a millennial. Gabrielle now utilizes her 11 years of millennial research to provide high-level solutions to a broad range of clients, from automotive giants to boutique media shops to the United States government. These solutions include marketing plans that aren't lame, recruiting and hiring strategies, and manager training programs that boost retention. Welcome, Gabrielle.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to pop on my webcam here for a few minutes just to get to see you guys and hang out with you. Don't mind my background. I'm installing new art, so eventually that's going to be popping up. But so good to meet all of you. My name is Gabrielle, and we're going to have such an incredible time here to be able to not only discuss how do we keep great people, but how do we create a work environment so great that people don't want to leave. And that's really kind of my heart behind this conversation today. So thanks for that intro, Megan. I'm a longtime friend of the organization, so I'm really looking forward to continuing to support each of you. As Megan mentioned before, this is a conversation. So if you have questions, by all means, utilize that chat function, and you can go ahead and type it in there so that way it doesn't get lost or you forget your question when it comes time to answer questions. That being said, as I see these pop up, and if it's relevant, I can also answer those questions as well. So I'm here for you every step of the way. So excited to spend some time here with you as we jump into it here today. As we're talking about how do we keep people longer, I've created an agenda here for us about what is it that we're going to be going over. First, we're going to be talking about why do people quit? Why is it that particularly right now, post-COVID, we're experiencing one of the largest turnover tracks in history, and what we can do to slow that down and stop it so that way we don't lose the great people that we have. We're going to be talking about why people stay and how do you do more of the things that make people want to stay. A lot of times we focus so much on the bad that we don't focus on doing more of the good, which, by the way, doing more of the good is usually cheaper and easier than stop doing the bad. So I'm going to share with you how to do that. I'm going to be talking about how do we compete for talent in 2022 and why this market is really unique. And finally, strategies for retention. I'm going to share with you some cheap, easy, and free approaches of how you can create a work environment so good that people don't want to leave. My approach is a simple one, and I think it can be summarized in this interesting quote by our friend Einstein, where he said, if I have an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. And when it comes to the challenge that most of us face when it comes to engaging our employees today, we really do need to think about what is the problem? How do we articulate the problem so that way we can come up with a solution? If you Google keeping employees, Great Recession, programs, I mean, the internet will try to sell you anything and everything when it comes to how do you solve this, fix this, address this issue of employee turnover. But today we're going to talk about what's causing it so that way we can identify the right solution for you. And so that way we're not running to a tech solution or a consultant or a band-aid of that could be fixed by a conversation or a training or a tool. So we're going to help you really clearly identify what is it that's really really going on here. And as many of you have experienced this overwhelming increase in employees leaving, and what's going on now, which I'll talk about more in depth, is that employees today are more likely than ever, and this is so important, they're more likely than ever to leave your industry and go to a neighboring industry. Whereas before, if someone didn't like working for you, they may say, hey, I don't like working for this boss or this company, I'm going to go across the street to a competitor. That is no longer the case. Now we're seeing employees saying, hey, I don't like this boss or industry. I'm going to get into marketing, or I'm going to go to law school, or I'm going to go out on my own, or I'm going to get into real estate. So we're seeing a crippling of industries because the internal knowledge, the legacy, is actually what's most at stake here. And that's what me and my firm, Millennial Solution, are most passionate about preserving, is the legacy inside of industries like yourself. One of the big conversations around why retention is so important is, yes, it's discouraging, yes, it's time consuming, but it's also really expensive. And so if we can identify how much it's costing us, we can actually have a conversation about how we can stop it from happening. In any business, no matter the size, people pay attention to things that cost them money. And so whether that's, a legal dispute, marketing, we have line items for things in our business, but we don't have line items for retention. So this is a very simple calculator that the Society for Human Resource Management uses to identify how much it's costing for one of your employees to leave. I encourage you to screenshot this, use this, send it to your head of HR, send it to other people in your company to say, let's identify how much it's costing us to lose someone, because if we see how much it's costing, and these costs are usually pretty hard costs, on average it's about 40 hours to recruit a qualified individual to a new position, but that could be increased based off of the specialization, certification, market that you're in. It also too does not include the management distraction of how much time the manager is actually having to take outside of his or her role to train this new employee. So it can get increasingly more expensive. And so if we see our role as helping to make money and save money by focusing on retention, it gives us more opportunity to have a conversation about where are we employing resources. If we do determine that we would like to have a consultant, a trainer, a new piece of technology, a platform that's going to help us, it helps us create a more intelligent conversation around retention. But first of all, let's talk about why people quit. Now, most people have theories about why people quit. And we spend a lot of our time in the generational space, and I've taught on this around the world. And when I ask people, why do you think millennials quit? Overwhelmingly, people say, because they're bored, which although that seems to be the consensus, it's just not the case when we look at the data. And so what we have learned is it's not the lack of interest that causes employees to move on. I mean, no employee I've ever met, no matter their age, has said, I really love quitting. Like, I love applying for jobs. I love doing interviews. I mean, that's really my jam. That's just what I would do all day, any day. Like, no one says that. It's a means to an end. And so people quit really for one of two reasons. People are either running from something or they're running to something. And so for us to identify if we've had 10% to 20% turnover, that's usually pretty normal inside of an organization. If we're seeing 20 to 30% or 50% turnover, that's when we really start to be, alerted to say there's something very wrong here. And not just company-wide, but depending on, the department. And so paying attention to who it is, even if that department is two people, if you lose one person, let's pay attention to what that is. Are they running from something or are they running to something? And so is it the unforced error of them running to something? Hey, maybe, their partner got a job somewhere. Maybe they decided to go back to school. Maybe they needed to move to take care of their parents. That's them running to something, and that's really nothing we can control. but is it them running from a bad boss, pay that they would perceive as being bad or under what they deserve, an industry that they don't find alignment with? What is it that they're running from? And then identifying, is it that they're running from us, or is it that they're running to something else? That's incredibly important for us to identify, because a lot of times when we have turnover, we lump it all together, when in reality, if we have 5 people quit in a year, 1 person got married, 1 person went to school, 1 person had a falling out with the owner, 1 person didn't feel like they were getting paid enough, 1 person just was kind of lazy or disgruntled or didn't find the work that they were doing as alignment with their passions. 3 of those could have been resolved, 2 of them couldn't have. So if we identify, and that's why data is so important. Most people don't collect data about why people quit or stay until they leave. Like, the exit interview is the most dishonest. The interview and the exit interview are the most dishonest employees are going to be, because the interview is they're saying what you want to hear so that they get a job, and the exit interview is them saying what you want to hear so that they don't do a negative recommendation at the next job that they put you down as a reference for. So it's really not a time where we're collecting real data. It's like breaking up with your ex and she's dropping off all of your clothes in a box at your house. Like, at that point, there's no reconciling what's going on, and they have no incentive to improve. And so exit interviews are not helpful. Continue doing them, they're just not helpful. So focusing on why is it that people are quitting. So as I shared before, more than ever, employees are changing industries, not just changing employers. That means that the knowledge, insight, and wisdom that we have with the people who are working for us is being lost because we're not able to retain them. It used to be, even if we had someone who wasn't a good for us or wasn't a good fit for us right now, would go work for a competitor or a tangential industry and then come back, kind of have that boomerang employee experience. We're not seeing that as much with the change of the economy as it is. So that's a huge challenge. I think that frankly, that's the number 1 challenge before us, is the institutional knowledge of the industry being lost. I can't underscore that enough. Also too, I think the secondary challenge is that we're not competing for talent with our industry peers. We're not, fishing from the same pond, so to speak. I mean, we've got so many people who are now leaving the industry and changing what they're doing completely and going into industries that didn't even exist before. So in some ways, we're kind of boxing blindfolded, is that we don't know what opportunities our employees are getting targeted with on social media. We don't know if someone's coming after them like, hey, get into Bitcoin, or get into real estate, or you should go back to school and become a kinesiologist, or what. We don't know what is coming across their feed. And it used to just be a slower cycle of people quitting for new opportunities, but now it's incredibly clear that the people who are on our payroll today have at least 10 options that they're considering and rolling through their mind of what else they could be doing. And so we have to prove to them every day that we are worth coming into work for. And we do that a number of ways. I'll share with you some techniques to do that. That's not a labor or distraction for you, but is a very clear added benefit for the people on your team. So that's the challenge. You're like, great, Gabrielle, thank you for depressing us about the future of the workforce. No one wants to work here and everyone's going to quit. That, in fact, is not true. But what we're wanting to adjust our mindset is, okay, what is the opportunity before us? COVID really did change the expectations of the workplace, which I'll talk about here in a moment. But the expectations of the workplace has shifted because people, certainly the work from home revolution changed how and when we work. But more than that, the role of the employer has changed, where people really do want stability. I think some, saw COVID as, this is my chance to shine. I'll, jump ship and figure it out later. And then kind of waited back to the stability of where they were before, because they realized how good that they had it. And so the Great Resignation is being readjusted, and I think that we're going to see the great hiring all over again. I think also too, employees really are in a season where they're wanting to be involved in the growth of the organization that they're a part of. They don't want a transactional relationship with us as employers. They want a transformational relationship with us. That quite simply means that they really crave involvement. And so before, you may think, well, they don't really care about how we acquire new customers or what our growth plan is for the year, or, fill in the blank. It's above their pay grade. However, we say that, we're seeing newer and younger employees really wanting to know the business behind the business. And we started to see that a number of years ago. We did a series of panels for Audi and tangentially Volkswagen as well. And what they did was they had us come in and look at their new and their young employees, and they said, okay, well, what are we at risk here? Like, why would they quit? And we identified the number one thing that they all said that they wanted was to know how the business made money. And that was really fascinating for us on the research side of things, because most people had this taker mindset about how employees see their role, like, hey, just give me money and time and, a line on my resume, and then I'll move on. But the truth was that there was that involvement piece. And then finally, employees want a clear future. Career pathing is the most important thing you can do when you hire someone new or promote someone. Everyone wants to know the context of the work that they're doing. How long do I need to be here? Should it take this long? Should it be this hard? Who did this role before me? How quickly did they get promoted? All of those things. Career pathing is really important. So say they're, maybe you're bringing on a role that there isn't a really clear career path. You're like, hey, you're our, scheduling assistant. Hey, you're our front desk representative. I mean, there may not be a clear career path. Finding out what they want to have achieved or accomplished. I think sometimes when we think about career pathing, we think it's got to be, these huge, broad steps, but sometimes it's just roles and responsibilities that are expanding. Sometimes it's impact. Sometimes it's the types of decisions that they're over. So identifying, hey, you hire someone and they're, working your front desk. Where is it that they see themselves in the next few years, and how do you help them get there, whether it's with you or with someone else? That was one of the most profound lessons that I learned working with one of our books, which I'll share with you guys how you guys get a free copy of our book, Keep Them Longer. But one of the interviews we did for that book was the head of people for Chili's Brinker, like Chili's, Maggiano's, those restaurant chains. And it was fascinating talking to him, because he said, I'm always training someone for their next job. And he said, I hope their next job is with us. I want to prove to them that it should be, but even if it's not, I want them to have really good things to say about us. And I thought that was a really profound and very humble approach to being a leader, is to always be preparing them for what's next. We should never assume that what they're doing for us is the only thing that they're capable of. Like, let's not think so small about who it is that's working for us and with us. It's seeing what's inside of them and helping them achieve it. But still, the number one reason that people quit is the direct relationship with their manager. It's amazing to me that despite the management training, assessments, what color are you, what number are you, you throw the book at these challenges, and overwhelmingly it's the relationship with a manager that really does impact how someone views their work. It's the person that they trust their performance to, their pay to, a lot of times, their recognition. I mean, so much is wrapped up with that manager. And yet we oftentimes don't train managers to manage until they've been promoted to managers. And so it's like training someone to fly a plane while you're in the air. I mean, you have to go to ground school. And so what is it that we're training people to do? How are we helping them avoid conflict, provide quality feedback, connect in a very real and authentic way? All of those are things that we need to train earlier and more often, so that way we retain people longer. I mean, if you're wanting to find the one thing that enables retention across the board, is making sure our managers have the resources that they need. Because a lot of times managers don't feel resourced. They feel like they're being pulled in a million directions, and they're like, well, this is one more thing I have to do. But the truth is that there is a huge opportunity for us as owners and leaders to resource them well, so that way they not only feel good about the work that they're doing, but are our best representatives to the people that we are working with. Because it really all does come down to expectation. So I'm going to share with you guys today a couple of hacks and strategies. Like I said, we'll do cheap, easy, and free here at the end of things that you can start to implement, as well as some free resources I like to give to you guys. But the number one element of relationships with managers and relationships with us as employers is expectations. So if you can do anything, it's have your employees, your new employees, whether they're new to you or new to a position, so they've been promoted or kind of repositioned in the organization, is to have them write down their expectations. Write down their 3 expectations for that role. How long do you expect to be here? What type of work do you expect to do? What kind of pay do you expect? Have categories for them, and you can even have sample expectations, but have them write out expectations, and then come to a meeting and you write out your expectations for them. And every single relationship, we have expectations. We have expectations of our partners and our kids and law enforcement and our neighbors. We have expectations, and yet our bitterness and frustration and frankly disappointment comes from those expectations not being met. Every single thing comes down to it. And so the better we are at clarifying those expectations and protecting us and protecting them from being disappointed, the happier we will be and the happier they will be as well. So clarifying expectations. I mean, if you're in a relationship, you cannot read the other person's mind. Even if you've been with them for a very long time and you're like, I know your favorite coffee, I know how you like your eggs, but I still don't know what's going on in your mind right now sitting in traffic. Like there's something going on and I don't know what it is, or I don't know why you're mad at me, or I don't know how you thought this vacation was going to go. All of those elements, think about the disagreements that you have in your everyday life. It all comes down to an expectation of you thought it was going to be a different way than they did. And that is why people quit. Their expectations, in truth, it's the relationship with their manager, but the truer truth is that it's expectations. And so if we can clarify expectations, we can then alleviate the tension of disappointment that comes from employees, because really employees quit because they're disappointed. They're disappointed in the work, the pay, the people. I mean, there are really only a few categories of what they're disappointed in. And so if we can clarify it, because sometimes people are coming in and their expectations are wildly unrealistic. You're like, whoa, what exactly did you think that we did here? And so if we can clarify those expectations, and just an aside, I get it. Sometimes as an employer, it's like, well, they should know. Like I was working with a Big 4 firm and they were talking about their accountants and they're like, we can't keep these accountants from quitting. And because they don't like that in the busy season, they don't really have a life. And like, we told them. I said, well, did you tell them? They're like, well, they should know. Well, from who? And so if we see our roles and responsibilities as managers, as educators and employers, we also to alleviate that tension, because we can't expect that they're coming in knowing exactly what it's going to be like for us, for this industry, for our particular location, all of those things. So let's focus on, we talked about why people quit. Let's talk about why people stay, so that way we can do more of the good stuff. As I mentioned before, side note, if you guys do engagement surveys, please stop. Turnover goes up after engagement surveys. Why? Because you have just asked your employees if they're engaged. They've self-identified that they're not engaged, and you've done nothing with the information. So we do stay interviews, which you guys can get access to at the end. I'll show you how to do that in a second. But a stay interview is quite simply, why did you choose to move here? or to work with us? What did you want to learn? What's your favorite thing about working here? What would you like us to do more of? What would you like to do more of? We're now creating a connection between their future and their desired state and connecting that to our role as their employer. So it's there's some ninja stuff in there and why it works, but it's a much better way for us to do more of what they like versus stop doing what they don't like. Because sometimes in engagement surveys, there are things that we can't help. Like, I'm really sorry that the parking lot is hard to get into. Like, we're not gonna, reconfigure the parking lot because one person doesn't like parking in the back. But instead of asking that, it's like, hey, what do you wish that we did more of? Oh, great, you really like that you do coffee, with the team on Fridays. Let's do more of that. So let's talk about why. How do we keep people to stay? And it's really these two fundamental questions that every single employee has, which is number one, do I matter? And number two, does what I do matter? This, my friends, is the fundamental question that all of our employees want to know, no matter their role, no matter what they do, no matter how long they've been there. Everyone wants to know that they matter, and number two, that what they do matters. And the best way I can illustrate this is a story of a man who was working on a radio tower in California. So the chief technology officer of the California Highway Patrol told me this story a few years ago. He said he had gone into work on a Saturday. He looked outside. There was a man working on the control tower, the radio tower, and, just being a good boss, he walked outside and said, hey, thanks so much for working. I really appreciate what you do. Simple strategy, another freebie. If you guys are like, oh my gosh, I don't want to spend a bunch of money trying to retain a few people, I've already given you a couple of free things, like number one, setting expectations. But number two is saying thank you. Thank your employees for the hard work that they do. It's simple, it's free, it takes about 30 seconds, and the dividends are huge. So he walked outside, said thanks. This man kind of shimmied down and started talking to this executive, and as they're kind of walking and talking, he told a story that was so profound. He said his daughter tried to get him to come to, it was like bring your parent to work day or career day or something, and he couldn't go because he was working. But he said, my daughter came home from school and said, Dad, does what you do matter? And this chief technology officer is just thinking like, oh my gosh, well, what did you say? And this repair guy says, I told her I didn't know. And this executive looks at him like, what do you mean you don't know? I mean, you repair these control towers, these radio towers. Like, if you don't take care of those, if someone gets in a life-threatening accident on the highway and calls 911, we can't dispatch emergency personnel. I mean, you are such a fundamental part of making sure that people's lives are saved. And this individual started to get a little teary-eyed because no one had helped him provide context to what he was doing. He just thought he was repairing radio towers. He didn't see himself as a part of something bigger. And so our roles as employers, leaders, managers is to provide context for the people in our organization to help them know that number one, they matter, and number two, that what they do matters. And it's a simple conversation, a context conversation for us to give to the people who work for us, for them to make the connection. And guys, I got to tell you, I know particularly for what we're doing here, we can take it for granted. Like, oh my goodness, we're coming alongside these families, we're creating honoring moments, we're celebrating life, we're in an industry of legacy. Of course they know that what they do matters. And I've got to tell you, I work with some of the most philanthropic organizations, religious organizations, amazing people, and they have the highest turnover because they rest on the mission statement, not on making the mission personal. They say, oh, well, we're saving the world. Of course, people will want to work here, but they don't make it personal. So how can we help the people from, the front lines to the front desk to marketing, recruiting, HR, finance, every single member of our team? Can they articulate how what they do matters? Can they tell you, if they're in HR, how what they're doing is supporting the mission of what it is that we're doing here? Can they tell a story of someone whose life was touched or whose family was changed because of the work that they were doing? It's something simple and easy. We as employers can help make that connection. We can also too host a virtual lunch and learn, an in-person lunch where we just all go around and say, what's your favorite story of what you've been able to see or be a part of here? It is an incredible moment, again, also free, where you can create emotional connections to our work. I think a lot of times as employers, we're like, well, you've got a great job, and we have a very logical approach, transactional approach to work. Working is both emotional and logical, and particularly for the next generation, every study shows that millennials will take and Gen Z as well, will take a lesser salary for more fulfillment. And so it's not money alone that's keeping them, and it's not money alone that's going to attract them. So let's find ways to provide context. And simple ways to do that is say, this is why this project is important. If it's something mundane, because work is work, and we've got systems and processes and Excel spreadsheets to fill out, and sometimes we get kind of bored or uninspired, I should say. So how do we help people, even if they're new or are in a season of doing some mundane tasks? How do we help them do that? So why is this project important? Why does it need to be done? Why does it need to be done by that person and not by someone else? What will happen if it's not successful? Having a simple contextual conversation really only needs to happen once or twice. Past that, they'll then start to answer these questions for themselves. But it's just helping them identify for themselves how to create context. Because again, these are some things that college doesn't teach us, society doesn't teach us, how to find context and how to find fulfillment in the work that they're doing. So this is incredibly important. So now that we've identified why people quit and why people stay, let's talk about how do we actually keep them longer. So we have a concept that we developed in our book, Keep Them Longer, which we developed over the course of a few years. It's just over 2 years, interviewing over 100 CEOs, chief people officers, and COOs here in the United States, focusing on what keeps people. How do you keep great people? What kind of culture needs to be in place? And so we developed this concept that we call the water cycle principle, which is stolen from 7th grade biology. we all remember that far back. This concept of the water cycle, we all know, is there's all the water in the world that's ever existed and that will ever exist. And that's kind of like value in an organization. That value exists. You can't create more or take it away. It just gets displaced. And so if we see value flowing, we can start to identify where things are getting stopped up. So we've got owners. So owners, investors are kind of at the top. Executives are the people so owners kind of set the vision, executives lead the vision, managers execute on the vision, employees fulfill the vision, and customers are benefited by the vision. That's kind of how this flow works. But for example, if we're having challenges with customers and we've got people that we're serving and they're not being served, there's customer complaints, our Google reviews aren't where they need to be, whatever that looks like, you look directly upstream and you see, okay, well, something's going on with the employees. If the customers aren't getting what they need, it means employees aren't getting what they need, because you cannot give what you are not given. Just simple truth. You cannot give what you're not given. So if you're having a hard time with employees, turnover, showing up late, not overall engaged, it means that the managers aren't getting what they need, because it means employees aren't given what they need, managers aren't being given what they need. So how do we help the managers? Maybe the managers are overwhelmed. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe they've got too many people that they're having to oversee. Maybe they're in a season of growth, or you're changing locations and things just aren't certain. So then that's kind of where we look at, maybe you've got managers who are disgruntled, they're not seeing like a long-term vision, maybe they're considering working for competitors or going out on their own. It means that they're not being given what they need. So you look at the executives. And so it's a really simple, incredibly profound way to look at wherever our problem area is. Look upstream, look to the left to identify who is not getting what they need, and how do we give it to them quickly, so that way the water cycle principle of that value being shared throughout the organization is being upheld. And I love this analogy. that I was taught in my first job ever. First job ever, I worked at a frozen yogurt place, Tasty Time in Folsom, California. And I will always remember the owner of this one location. I think eventually he opened up 2 locations of this frozen yogurt shop that had a dancing ice cream cone in the front. I was never the dancing ice cream cone. I just want to make that very clear. I had standards, but I remember my first day, Rich, the owner, sat me down, he had a whiteboard, and he taught me the value of frozen yogurt and the value of a customer. He said, how much do you think an average frozen yogurt goes out the door for? I was like, I don't know, under $4. He said, yeah, it's about $3.44. So what do you think the value of a customer is? I said, $3.44. He said, no, it's not, because that customer, if they have a good experience, they'll come back an average of 10 times. But when they're coming back, 50% of those times they're going to be bringing other people with them. So he started to share with me the importance of referrals, of creating a customer experience, of investing in the person who's right in front of me, and not just trying to take care of them and get them out the door. It mattered just as much about how they felt while they were there as the quality of the content of the frozen yogurt that we were serving. And so it taught me this profound principle about being an owner, owning that experience, so that way he or she, whoever it is that I was serving, was going to come back in. And so the same is true when it comes to helping every single person on our team understand the customer experience. So that way they see themselves as owning that experience. Kind of like I mentioned before, the biggest thing that employees at Audi and Volkswagen wanted to know was, how do we make money here? I just want to know, like, how, like, I'm in this incredible organization, how does this all work? And so a lot of times as busy leaders, managers, owners, we're like, oh, well, they don't need to know, or they don't care. But the truth is that they do. And it's a huge opportunity and a superpower of organizations who get buy-in from their employees if we see them as assets and not as liabilities. And so thinking about, how do we take our frozen yogurt experience, maybe it's a family that we're serving, and instead of just saying, hey, this is this one person, what does that person represent? What referral opportunity comes from them? How many other times are we going to see that person or that family through that person's life cycle? And so helping the person at the front desk, the head of HR, someone doing our finances or our books, everyone to understand, this is the value of this relationship, and that's why we're so present. That's why we care so much. That's why we go above and beyond. And so helping them understand and teaching them in a very visceral way, a very memorable way, how it is that we make money here. So now we're going to talk about programs that exist that you can start to engage and retain. And like I said, we're going to talk about cheap, easy, and free. So some things that are going to take some time. I talked about the free side of things, of having conversations, setting expectations, just having, saying thank you, very basic, very free things, things that usually our moms taught us growing up, bringing that back around. But now I want to talk about some programs that may require some time investment or even some capital investment, which is number one, an onboarding program. Even if you're only hiring 2 people, 1 person a quarter, 4 people a year, 2 people a year even, you want to focus on, what is that experience like? That onboarding needs to be your top engagement and retention tool. That's actually what we found as companies and organizations, no matter their size, if they have a good onboarding experience, they don't have retention issues because people are bought into the vision. So onboarding needs to be multi-week. Most people do onboarding like waterboarding, and it's like, you're here and you just have to, consume all this information, and I hope that you remembered it all. It's like, we need compliance, or OSHA, or whatever it is that we're trying to run through, and it's just not helpful. And so you want to create something, number one, that's multi-week, something that's at least 2 weeks, preferably 6, to give them micro information that they can actually learn and understand. Number 2, you want to make sure that you tell the story. This is who we are and this is what we do. Here are examples of families that we've served. Here are examples of things that we've done in the community. Here's our founder's story. So telling the story and helping them find their place in the story is a number 2 on onboarding. Number 3 is teaching them how decisions are made. So one of the worst things you can do is you've got this new whippersnapper employee who has all these ideas, and they come in and then they're just told like, oh, well, we don't do that here. Or that's, you know, we don't move that fast, or, you know, oh, you know, thanks for your idea, but you're not going to take it. And so by doing that, we actually really limit the excitement about these new employees, because we're essentially just saying, hey, we're so glad that you're here and that you have all these new ideas. However, we're not going to take any of them. And so we lull what could be a very excited employee and potentially a young manager or a new manager. We've just told them, you know, sit back and just, you know, do what you're told. And that's just not, that's not a way to grow. That's not a way to retain. And it's not a way to create a great work environment. So those are the core elements of onboarding, teaching them how decisions are made. Hey, if you got a new idea, here's how things, you know, here's how you propose a new idea, or here's how we kind of prove or disprove a new idea. If you have a new employee coming in and they're suggesting new ways of doing things, that is such an asset. Do not discourage it, because if you discourage it, they're going to leave. And nearly every other instance, when someone has a new idea, people are like, oh, that's great, you know, let's talk about it. But so many organizations, because they're not set up for innovation, they just squash new ideas. So come up with a way to do that. A really simple way, again, it's also free, is to say, hey, if you got someone who's got lots of ideas, say, oh my gosh, I love that you have that idea. Can you come up with 3 solutions for how we can go across, how we can address that? And whether it's them coming to you saying, hey, you know, I think that there's this new technology we should pursue. I love that you're thinking about how we can update the technology that we have. How about you come to me and create a proposal? This is how much it's going to cost. This is how long it's going to take. Here's the approach that we need to take. This is how we get buy-in. Here, just start to teach them how to become problem solvers. Number one, it's one less thing you have to do. So you're welcome. But number 2, you're teaching them how to own their role, own their position, and that's how you get buy-in. Number 2, state interviews, as I mentioned before, engagement interviews lead to high turnover, state interviews lead to retention, quite simply because you're finding out what it is that they like and how do we do more of it. And finally, whole person training. This really exploded during COVID, where people realized, oh, we need more resources on mental health, or on having a good relationship with your partner, or being a present parent. I mean, there were so many instances where employers started to prick up their ears to say, hey, we actually have a huge responsibility here. How do we help our employees thrive at home and at work? Because there's so much data that shows if a person gets in a fight with their partner on their way into work, their engagement tanks, their productivity tanks. If they have a sick parent or a child going through a health episode, they're distracted at work. So how do we give them the tools to thrive at home and at work? It's not just our job to protect them while they're at work. How do we help them live better lives as well? So identifying what they need. So one of the most applicable is time management. Most people do not manage their time well. They react. They wake up and they react to their email inbox. They get to work, they react to whatever request comes across their screen. Everyone is reacting. So if you can put them back in control of their life, they're going to feel really good about it. Whole person training could be about inputs, health and fitness, making sure you're getting enough nutrition and sleep. Whole person training could be parenting, conflict resolution. It could be finances. I mean, there's so many ways. Once you identify what are the things you think about at work when you should be working, don't put it that way, but what are the things that are distracting them throughout the day, and how do we put some things in place to protect them? That's what whole person training is. So some of the biggest mistakes I see people making, and then we'll go into some Q&A here, is number 1, not measuring retention year over year. If you don't know what your turnover is year over year, you don't know how many people you're keeping, how many people you're losing, you don't have any data about where to invest your time and money. Like most people are like, oh yeah, we lost so many people last year, but you don't know how much it cost, you don't know what the trigger was, there's no data, and so it's really emotional. Retention is so emotional for most organizations because we know there's a face and a name, especially for under 50 people, like we know those people there, we have relationships with those people. So if we have data, it just helps us make better decisions. Number two, like I said, not calculating the cost per lost employee per position. If a manager knows, okay, it's going to cost me $45,000, it costs the organization $45,000 for us to lose this one particular employee, I'm going to work harder and maybe even build in some incentives for managers if they have a couple employees and there's high turnover. Give them an incentive to retain those people longer because you're going to be saving money. So helping them identify and know we're saving money by keeping people. But we never want to keep people who want to leave. Like we're not into hostage situations. Like if people want to leave, they're not going to be beneficial to our organization anyway. I think sometimes people think like retain them at all costs. That is not what I'm advocating for. I am saying let's create environments so good people want to stay, and even if they're not good fits, that they fight to continue working for you. I mean, I had to on Friday let someone go just because of performance. He's a great fit. He's a great asset to our team. But I was like, you know what, it's just not a good fit. Like performance wise, there's some things that are going on. And he's like, I will do whatever it takes. Put me on a performance plan. Like I'll get, all of these resources because the role he's in is more sales related. And I said, okay, well, we'll put you on a performance plan for 2 weeks, and he's crushing it. But it was so interesting because he was like, I can't lose this. Like, I love you guys. I love the team. I love the mission of what we're doing here. I'll do whatever it takes to get my numbers up. He said, if you're saying it's my numbers, if you're saying like, if that's the only thing that it is, I will do what it takes. And it was really very, and that's not always the case when you have to let people go, but it really did mean a lot because we spend so much time as a team. We've got a small team, we've only got 12 people, but knowing how much time we put into our culture, that someone is fighting to stay on our team meant a lot. So because we spent a lot of time in the input of that. Don't bait employees into staying with more money. That does not work, and it's just an expensive mistake. So research shows that the average fulfillment, I should say, or like lack of frustration of an employee, if they're planning on quitting and you give them a raise or a promotion, the average happiness only lasts for 4 weeks. So you're really only saving like one payroll cycle. So it's really, you may just keep them for another 4 weeks and they're going to try to quit anyway. So don't try to bait them with more money if they are not fully engaged. There are other things going on. And then of course, not offering clear career paths. As soon as someone joins, give them examples, work with them, help them identify maybe just not the position that they want, but the kind of responsibility, the kind of impact. For some career path, it's position oriented, some it's pay, and some it's lifestyle. Is that thing maybe for them? Maybe, they're, a parent and their career path is, yeah, I want to take off Fridays to hang out with my son. Are there things that we can do that can help create those types of environments? If that's one of their goals, maybe it's not, I want to be, the site manager. Maybe there's some other things that we can put in place. So that's going to be really important. So here's your action checklist. And as I kind of go through these, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat here. Action checklist number 1, quantify how much your turnover is costing you. If you don't know how much it's costing you, you will not invest the time or necessary effort to fix anything. If you're not the decision maker, it's very unlikely that they're going to take action on something that they don't know how much it's costing. So quantify it is key. Number 2, determine what's healthy versus unhealthy turnover. I mean, 10% turnover really isn't bad. And sometimes when we're a small team, we feel like it's horrible, but that's usually pretty standard. So finding out what healthy versus unhealthy turnover, again, are they leaving for something? Or are they leaving because of us? Develop your retention strategy. What are we going to do first? I gave you a couple of examples, but is your first domino creating an onboarding program? Is it career pathing? Is it just training on teaching the team how we make money and how to serve people? You don't have to do them all at once, but identify, we call them domino 1 activities. What's the activity that's going to have the biggest bang? Maybe not just for your buck, because some of these things are free, but for your buy-in. I mean, you can't throw so much at an organization to say we're doing all of these new things. So identify the one that's going to have the biggest, is going to have the easiest opt-in and the biggest impact. And that then creates trust, especially if you're, on a team that, maybe isn't super open to change. So keeping that in mind, determine what program we should tackle first, and then of course measure what matters. So for you, it could be retention, it could be turnover, it could be, customer retention, even like what are the things that really matter to us, and just focusing on those core metrics are going to be really important. So here's kind of what we covered. Number one, why people quit versus why people stay. We talked about why 2022 is unique in the talent war that we're experiencing, that we're not just competing against each other, but we're competing against industries that didn't exist before and industries that we've never even heard of. We talked about the most common retention mistakes and how to avoid them. We talked about retention and engagement, and of course, strategies for retention and how you can start to implement those on a team. So I've included here a way to get our book, Keep Them Longer. It's totally for free. You just have to cover a couple bucks for shipping and handling. It goes out of our distribution center in Ohio. Just text the word purpose to 55444. And there's also a sample state interview. I think that there's actual interview questions as well on when you're hiring someone. There's a number of free resources that we included in there. So go ahead and text 55444 if you're interested in getting that resource. But I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions here. If you guys want to type in the chat or in the question section, I prefer the chat because it's easier to see what your question is, so I can make sure to address it here.
The first question we did get, Gabrielle, was someone asking if the slides would be available after today's webinar.
Yeah, I'd be happy to send that over to you guys.
Okay, great, thank you.
That was the easiest question I think I've ever been asked, so thanks for that. What else, guys? What other questions do you have? Even if it's extremely specific to what it is that you guys are working on.
We're getting a few comments, just a lot of good feedback on the session, and thanking you for your time. We did get one question, if you could explain onboarding again.
Sure. Yeah, but by onboarding, it's when you just brought on someone to work for you. And so as you're hiring someone, so say someone just accepted a position, usually we have a couple things that we go over. Like if we have an HR person or department, we usually send them over to them and they're going to focus on compliance. Here's how you here's how you asked for time off. They're going to probably talk about health and benefits. They're going to kind of go over those, what I call the kind of logistics of the position and of the role. And then they get, sat with their manager, whoever it is that's going to oversee them, who's going to say, here are the things that you need to do every day. And at that point, it just kind of becomes a checklist. And so by onboarding, I'm talking about that first introduction to the organization when we first start working together. When they've accepted our offer, they're like, yes, I'm going to come in, whether I'm, hourly or salary, and I'm saying, okay, I want to work for you. What does that initial relationship look like? Because that really sets the tone for how the rest of your relationship is going to go. And so a lot of times we just teach people to be very reactive. We teach employees to kind of sit and wait to be told what to do, versus teaching them to take ownership, be curious, come up with solutions. So there's a story that we talk about in our book, Keep Them Longer, called the Fresh Eyes program, where new employees were actually told to find a problem in the organization and the company and come up with a solution to it. And, it saved this particular company millions of dollars because of their scale, but it really taught us so much about how do we trust our people more to identify problems inside of the organization and find ways to fix it. That's what I get really excited about. So that's what I mean by onboarding is as soon as you hire someone, what's their relationship like with the organization?
Okay, we have another question. Do you have any recommendations on locating new employees? We've been short-staffed and struggling to find workers even after placing openings on different sites.
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely it's interesting because it's like the great hiring kind of was followed by the great resignation. So we've got this interesting balance. So a couple of things. I mean, number one, the best way to hire someone is to use your employees to recruit. Um, what we found, especially in niche industries, people who people who found themselves in the industry, it was a referral from someone who was currently working there. So how are we equipping people to share their experience about working for us? That's going to be really important. So that's number one is how do we equip people who currently work for us to be our recruiters? And you can do that with incentives. You can do that with overall training. You can just make that a part of the culture. So that's number one. Number two, if you're using a platform like a monster.com or a ZipRecruiter. I mean, there are a number of platforms, and I've found that different platforms play better in different regions. Like some regions, like Craigslist, even works really well. So that has been really interesting to me working with people kind of throughout the U.S. So playing around with it is going to be really important, but utilizing other elements of social media. So like most people have a Facebook group or a Facebook page, I should say. I wouldn't necessarily start to recruit that way, but if you can have people who maybe post on their social media, hey, we're hiring, utilizing the social media in a respectful way of the people who work for you is great. If you have a page, you can certainly post in that regard, but starting to utilize some organic messaging to get people interested in the role is a good way of going about it. And if you are posting your job on a platform like ZipRecruiter, Monster, etc., maybe adjust your job description. So a lot of times we just post the job description in a very kind of clinical sense that this is what you're doing and this is what we're looking for. Be more creative, tell a story, explain, certainly there's content limits, but be more creative rather than just posting something. If you're having a hard time getting people applying, that could be it, is the actual job description itself, which I think that there's a sample job description actually in those giveaways as well. So that could be a resource for you to check out. But I would update the job description as kind of point number 3.
Okay, well, last question is about combining industries to retain talent.
And what do you mean combining industries?
I'm not quite sure. So if the gentleman who asked that question wants to give us a little more information.
Maybe it's kind of in regards to how I shared that people are leaving one industry to go to another. And so because of that, like we're seeing some people kind of cross-pollinate amongst industries, like, hey, I'm going to get into marketing after being a lawyer. I'm going to bring in some of my insight from my legal profession, etc. So if you're seeing people, if you're recruiting from other industries, that also too means that, which is maybe a question from before, is how do we recruit new people? Sometimes we're trying to recruit people from the same industry, like do what everyone else is doing and find people in other industries who are looking for a more fulfilling, more engaging type role, and find opportunities to get them involved in what it is that you're doing as well. So that could be it as well, as like, hey, if we're bringing in someone from marketing, what experience are they coming from a completely different industry, that may be really helpful. So I think sometimes we just want to have very linear, one-for-one relationships with our employees, like, hey, I want you to come in and do this role that you did for someone else. But we can actually be much more creative because they may be bringing in some best practices from a different industry that we never had even thought of.
Okay, I think he's referring to hiring skills, and he said today's tech skills are last generation Excel skills, etc. hire people for their other skills to better retain them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's very fair. So kind of talking about it's back to kind of I talked about training the whole person, but it's also to hiring the whole person. So we're seeing a lot of companies do that where they're saying, hey, what are some other skills that you have that you haven't been able to use at work? And so it could be a passion like photography or event planning. It could be an interest like painting or like an organizational skill. And so if we learn more about our employees and we can employ them to do that more inside of our organization, that's also too going to be, I think, a really smart way for us as we're seeking to identify ways to keep them longer. So yeah, I think opening up a conversation with them about what are the other skills and opportunities that you'd like to pursue that you haven't been able to at previous roles or opportunities. That's another good way to have insight from other industries as well.
Okay, great. If anybody has any last questions, please feel free to type them. Otherwise, I think we are all set.
Awesome, my friend. Well, thank you so much. I hope that this has been helpful. Go ahead and check out that free resource that I shared with you about just covering, if you could just cover our shipping costs, that would be really helpful, but you guys get free access to those resources as well. And as always, it's an honor and always very exciting to spend some time with each of you here.
Great. Well, thank you, Gabrielle, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. Just a reminder, please allow for 7 to 10 business days to receive your CEU. And thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.